All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Cindy Sesegoy, the Executive Director of the Cleveland 2030 District. We're happy to have you with us today. We put on these series of education sessions presented in partnership with all of these organizations on the screen. Our partner for today's session is AIA Cleveland. They've been a wonderful partner to Cleveland 2030 District since the very beginning, and we thank them for that. Special thanks to Megan Prose with Prospectus and Abby Baker with Moody Nolan for helping me organize today's session. Abby and Megan, thanks so very much. Appreciate it. Just a quick disclaimer. Views in this presentation are those of the presenters. Cleveland 2030 District is not endorsing or recommending. So if you need any further information, you should contact the presenters directly. Today's session is all about commendable historic building upgrades and adaptive reuse projects. We're going to hear a few fabulous case studies. I've already seen the before and after pictures. They're unbelievable. I'm sure you're going to enjoy the session. And then we're also going to hear about a new tool to compare embodied carbon between renovation and new construction. So we've got a great session in store. Thanks very much to our event sponsors, Marus Brothers and DLR Group. DLR Group is one of the Cleveland 2030 District professional partners, so thank you for that. DLR Group is an integrated design firm delivering architecture, engineering, interiors, planning, and building optimization for new construction, renovation, and adaptive reuse. Their promise is to elevate the human experience through design. This promise inspires sustainable design for a diverse group of public and private sector clients, local communities, and our planet. DLR Group is 100% employee-owned and fully supports the initiatives and goals of the 2030 Challenge and is an initial signatory to the China Accord and the AIA 2030 commitment. Marus Brothers, our other event sponsor for today. Thank you so very much. Marus Brothers Construction is a privately held, family-owned and operated general corporation engaged in the practice of providing high-quality construction management, at-risk, design build, general contracting, and subcontracting services for many of the region's most architecturally significant and complex renovation and new construction projects throughout our 44-year history. You will find that we have earned an outstanding reputation for delivering superior performance while managing risk for and on behalf of our substantial client base. We are heavily invested in the present and future success of Northeast Ohio region and are proud to call Willoughby in Lake County, Ohio, our base of operations. We have developed particular expertise in the following sectors: commercial office, cultural arts, multifamily residential, higher ed, K-12 education, healthcare, hospitality, retail, light industrial, and automotive. We are considered to be one of the region's leading historic renovation expert with over 40 projects completed totaling more than $1 billion in value. We team with both for-profit and not-for-profit developers on a broad range of project sizes and specialize in catalytic neighborhood redevelopment initiatives. Similarly, our work on major hospitality, restaurant, and retail projects located in urban centers have reinvigorated central business districts while providing meaningful employment opportunities. Our clients will tell you that we are excellent at-risk managers. We are comfortable with working at risk because we take the time to understand our clients' needs to help craft three-dimensional solutions that are creative, cost-effective, and entirely practical. We are known for fostering excellent working relationships with architects, engineers, consultants, as well as with our clients, who will tell you that the quality of our pre-construction phase services is compassionate, organized, creative, and without peer. Again, thanks very much to both of our session sponsors today. Just a plug for upcoming education sessions. Our May 9th education session will be celebrating all of our Green Building Challenge winners. So please mark your calendar for that one. That'll be another wonderful session. And then, of course, you see the rest of them for the rest of the year. Mark your calendars. I'm sure you'll enjoy all of these sessions. Before we start, we are offering continuing education credits. I will send the sign-in sheet out right after the session today. Please complete it by close of business today. We're also going to send out a very short survey after the session. It's literally 2 questions. Please complete it. We need your feedback so that we can continue to bring sessions that are of value to you. We'll use the chat feature to ask our questions. You can enter them throughout today's session, but we are going to hold questions to the end and we'll address them in panel style. And we are recording today's session and it will be posted to the Cleveland 2030 District Library page. I'm not going to read through the bios. We've got great speakers today. These bios were sent to you ahead of time. Our first speaker will be Lori Ferris. She's with Architecture 2030. Arn Goldman with Marus Brothers Construction. Brant Miller with the DLR Group. And Jared Freeman will be our final speaker, also with Marus Brothers Construction. So with that, let me turn it over to Lori. Let me stop sharing, and Lori, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off.
Great, thanks, Cindy. Let me get my screen up here. All right, thanks so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. So I am, as Cindy said, I'm Lori Ferris. I'm a senior fellow with Architecture 2030, an architect and a structural engineer. And my work as a practitioner and as a researcher has really focused at the intersectionality of climate action and building reuse and preservation, and really understanding how we can leverage our existing built environment to meet our climate targets. So I am going to kind of start by just kind of setting some context, and then I'll talk about the CARE tool, which is the free online tool Architecture 2030 hosts to help quantify whole life carbon emissions and benefits of reusing buildings. So I know that the topic of embodied carbon has been rapidly gaining a lot of traction in our industry, but there's still a pretty wide spread of familiarity. So I'm just going to go through the concept very quickly. Bear with me if this is a refresher for you. But I really want to make sure we're all on the same page about whole life carbon in buildings. And this is really where the industry is going globally. It's not just about energy efficiency anymore. It's really looking at the cradle to grave or cradle to cradle impact of our built environment. So when we look at the contribution of buildings globally to greenhouse gas emissions, we know that we're up at about 42%. So our industry, our built environment, contributes a massive amount proportionally of our global carbon footprint. About 2/3 of this are operational emissions from operating our built environment, and the other third are the embodied carbon emissions associated with creating the materials that go into our built environment. And so we really need to think about both of these pieces, both how we make our buildings and how we operate our buildings if we truly want to get to zero emissions. And I'd like to go through these couple of terms just to make sure we're all on the same page. Firstly, carbon. We throw around this term carbon all the time, and I think it can mean different things depending on how we're using it. So when I use the term carbon in this presentation, I'm really talking about carbon dioxide equivalents, which is really a proxy for all greenhouse gases. It's not quite the same thing as carbon dioxide. So this is just a little point of clarification. When we're talking about embodied carbon, we're actually frequently talking about methane and all of the other greenhouse gases also put into one common metric of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's one note. And then we have, of course, embodied carbon, which is the carbon footprint of a material or assembly or building. This is all of the greenhouse gas emissions associated from materials extraction, processing, transportation, assembly, construction, and then end of life. So it's everything other than operating the building. And then we have our operational carbon, which are the carbon emissions that result from energy used to power, heat, cool, light, any other function that happens within the building. And then life cycle assessment. Hopefully you all are familiar with this term, this process, but this is the methodology we have for measuring that cradle to grave footprint of a building, a product, a service, et cetera. All right, and this is really important because I really believe this quote, it's not mine, of course, but you cannot manage what you can't measure. And historically for a long time in our industry, we really just talked about energy use in our building. And so you can see that's this one little piece of a building's life cycle, how we use and maintain the building. And so we were optimizing for this stage only, but that was happening at the exclusion of all the other life cycle stages. So when we bring embodied carbon into a conversation, we're really just looking at the whole picture here, not just our operational use, but the entire life cycle of the building. And embodied carbon is actually pretty simple in concept to calculate. It's really just a material quantity. How much of a material do you have times an impact multiplier? What is the environmental impact of creating that material? And then you get your environmental impact. So for embodied carbon, it's how much, for example, how much glass goes into a building, what is the carbon footprint of that glass, and then you multiply those and you get your total carbon footprint. And the reason I'm showing you this is because there are two levers we have to reduce embodied carbon. One is to use less material, to just avoid new materials in the first place. So this is one place, obviously, where reuse comes in. And then the second is to use better materials, to use much lower carbon materials. So either of those pieces can really help us reduce our embodied carbon. Okay, so that's my, my little embodied carbon 101, just to bring everyone up to the same starting point here. As I really go into the case for building reuse and why our existing buildings are such a critical asset in our path towards a zero emissions built environment. All right, so I like to start with this picture because I think, you know, this has become kind of trendy over the past decade or so. It's the, you know, general consumers have bought into this concept that it's much better to have something that you can reuse over and over with a longer lifespan, better durability, you know, that we doesn't go into the dumpster every time we use it, than as opposed to a single use item. So we have started to understand this with coffee cups, with our straws, with little utensils we carry around, with water bottles. That all makes sense. However, we still see this all the time, that buildings, which are our largest objects, are still treated as somewhat disposable. And so this is really kind of a disconnect, I think. We need to think more about how we can see our existing buildings as valuable assets, as repositories of material, as sunk carbon costs that we can really invest in and reinvest in, as opposed to something that's disposable that we need to start over. And all of this matters because we are in a triple planetary crisis. So these charts from the Stockholm Resilience Center, I think, are really illustrative that as of 2023, we've crossed 6 of our 9 planetary boundaries. And what that means simply is that we are using our Earth's resources. We're exceeding the Earth's resources. We are living in a way that uses more than the Earth can provide. So we know that we're doing this. This is just not sustainable. And we have to kind of, I think, question some of our underlying assumptions about how we use buildings and materials and resources. And so, you know, also we know that there's a time value to carbon, that we don't have the luxury of looking over the whole life of a building anymore, because we're emitting globally at a rate of about 40 gigatons every year. And so the Paris Accord, you know, said that we would get to net zero by 2050, but we know that we're not on track to meet to stay within our carbon budget. So that's no longer enough. And in fact, what we have to do is reduce our emissions by 50 to 65% by 2030. We've made very few reductions at all. So this, you know, the timeline keeps ticking and our goal remains the same there, that massive reduction in the next 5 to 6 years. And then we need to be net zero by 2040. So again, this time value, the carbon that we can reduce in the near term matters more than carbon we can save in 50 or 60 or 100 years. This is again where that upfront embodied carbon becomes very important. So we're all familiar with this phrase, the greenest building is the one that's already built. And I just want to talk about, again, why this is. So when we look at average new construction, we know that it has an embodied carbon footprint. Again, those materials required to make a building, those are mostly upfront. Again, before anyone steps inside the building, these emissions have gone into the atmosphere. And then we have our operational carbon, which accumulates every year as the building uses energy. What's important is that by the year 2040 and even by the year 2050, most of the carbon emissions associated with new construction are those embodied carbon emissions. So we need to shift or really expand our focus to not just be about operational efficiency, but really to look at those upfront emissions very closely. When we reuse a building, however, we can reduce those embodied carbon emissions by 50 to 75% typically if we're reusing a whole building. And you can just see quickly here that this is because, and these are just kind of benchmark numbers. For typical new construction out of concrete and steel, Most of that upfront carbon footprint comes from structure, then from envelope, interiors, and systems. You can see that that changes. Obviously, that gets lower if we use a lower embodied carbon structural system. But with the renovation, you typically have much less structural work. You typically have much less envelope work, many fewer materials going into the building. And so this is how we can really reduce our embodied carbon through reuse. And existing buildings, I think this is important to point out, again, not just about embodied carbon, but our existing buildings operate, have a lot of operational emissions as well. We saw those numbers globally in cities in the US and around the world. Those numbers are even higher. So where I am here in Boston, nearly 3/4 of our emissions come from operating our buildings. That's a huge number. And we know that by 2040, 2/3 of our building stock will be those same buildings that we already have today. And so if we do not improve those buildings, if we don't address their energy use and improve their operational efficiency, they're still going to be emitting. And we simply cannot achieve a zero emissions built environment without addressing them. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. We have to both reduce operational emissions and reduce embodied emissions. So we posit that it's not just the greenest building is the one that already exists. It's really the greenest building is the one that's been saved and upgraded. And I just want to note, of course, I think we'll see this in the case studies, that it's not just about carbon and it's not just about environment, that there are many other considerations with building reuse that have to do with strengthening community cohesion, with leveraging identity, and with reinvesting in local jobs and local traditions, reinvesting in people. This is really what it's all about. So while we're talking about carbon, of course, we should not lose sight of this other. All right, so I'm going to talk about quantifying the carbon of reuse, because it's all well and good to talk kind of conceptually about this, but how do we really put numbers to it? And that's where this can be a little bit trickier than talking about energy, where you just read your utility meter or your utility bill. How do we really quantify the savings associated with reusing what we already have? So working with a team at 2030, we've launched the CARE tool, the Carbon Avoided Retrofit Estimator, which is a free online tool that does just this. It very simply assesses the carbon benefits of reuse compared to new construction. This is the team. This idea for the CARE tool came from Larry Strain of Siegel and Strain Architects in the Bay Area. Aaron McDade from Architecture 2030 has done a lot of the early development work, a lot of the data, tying this back to the Zero tool and other 2030 work. And then my role is really a lot about embodied carbon and about reusing existing buildings and the way we do that as practitioners. I like to show this slide because it was really a team effort to create the CARE tool, and it represents the perspective and the knowledge of many different, typically siloed parts of our industry. So it's preservation professionals, climate researchers like Carbon Leadership Forum, other architecture firms, the AIA. It was really many different stakeholder groups coming together to put to really create this tool. All right, so what it is an early phase decision-making tool that evaluates total carbon emissions and compares the impact potential of existing building reuse to new construction. So just to break this down, firstly, early phase decision-making tool. This is not a detailed life cycle assessment tool. It is really meant for high-level estimations to inform that early decision-making. Secondly, total carbon emissions. It does look at both embodied and operational emissions. Again, it's so critical that we address that whole life cycle and understand the trade-offs. So it is meant to look at both. And then lastly, looking at existing building reuse and new construction. So you can use the CARE tool just to evaluate reuse within itself, but you can also look at it to say what happens if we reuse compared to replace, or if we reuse and retrofit compared to just leaving a building as is. So that comparative element is really important. It's also designed to be accessed by a really broad list of stakeholders and users. So again, because it's high level, you don't have to have an advanced degree in LCA to use this tool. It's really meant to be accessible to people who are making those early decisions, including building owners, planners, potentially policymakers. And we've actually seen a lot of uptake with educators as well to bring these concepts into the classroom and teach architecture and preservation students about life cycle emissions. All right, so here's what it looks like in action. You can see first you enter some general information that starts to pull default values about the climate and emissions from the back end of the tool. We then go into defining the existing building. So pretty basic, how big is it? What is it used for? And then how much energy does it use, which it will pull from the zero tool if you don't know, or you can enter your own information if you have utility data or you know your EY. And you can see already that the charts on the right have started to populate. We then define the renovation, and this is the most complicated tab because, as all of you who work with existing buildings know, there are basically an infinite number of ways to reuse any building. So we've tried to simplify it, and essentially you input how much you're intervening in the structure, the envelope, the interiors, and the mechanical systems. And then from there, it estimates your carbon. And lastly, new construction. Again, how big is your building? What is it used for? And what is your proposed structural typology? And from that, you get these dynamic charts. So hopefully you saw these charts updating in real time. So you can really start to kind of develop an intuition for how different variables impact these outcomes. But what we see on the top is total carbon emissions over a time period. So in this case, we can see that doing nothing yielded the most total emissions. Reusing and adding to this building really dramatically reduced the emissions for this period we've assessed. And then the new building is almost twice the carbon footprint of the renovation. And then on the bottom, we see how those emissions play out over time. And this is really important, again, thinking about that time value of carbon. Sorry, I have animations here. Right, so we see the embodied and operational emissions over for the cumulative, right? And then over time, do nothing, new building, and retrofit. And this is important to understand when certain decisions make sense. Again, it's not just about the total carbon, not just about 0 by 2050, it's about how we get there. So this allows you to see these kind of payback periods of when certain choices will pay back over another, not from a cost perspective, but from a carbon expenditure. Okay, so that's a quick run through of the tool. I just want to show you how we can apply this to a project. So this is a renovation project that my firm did almost a decade ago at this point. It was a transformative adaptive reuse of a purpose-built Hillel Center. You can see here this international style building at the edge of a historic district, which was converted into an admission center through a comprehensive renovation, an energy upgrade to the envelopes. You can see the exterior was preserved with some new glazing added, but the interior was insulated, new MEP systems. 86% of the structure and enclosure were reused. And that's really important because those are the two most carbon intensive parts of a building. At the same time, we reduced the operational energy use by 70%. So the operational energy performance, the energy efficiency of this building post-renovation was comparable to really high performance new construction. So not using the CARE tool, because that didn't exist when we did this analysis at first, we actually did a detailed life cycle assessment of this renovation to understand what was the carbon footprint of all of the materials we'd added to the building, and how did that pay back compared to new construction? So we used Tally, which is a software that plugs into Revit. What Tally does is it reads detailed material quantities from your Revit model. You assign Tally properties, which have the life cycle information embedded within them for each of those materials, and then it gives you your embodied carbon by well, you can parse the data a number of ways, but it gives you your embodied carbon of your materials. And so these are our results. You can see on the left of this chart are the embodied carbon outputs of the renovation. And then so you can see it's about 300,000, under 300,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents. And on the right hand is a hypothetical replacement building. So this is, if you were to replace this with typical new construction, what would your embodied carbon be? And here we have almost 800,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide. So you can see the huge savings that we achieved through renovation. This is what we call the avoided emissions of reuse compared to new construction, because it's materials that we did not have to create new because we reused what was already there. So we did actually, this is one of the buildings we used to test and vet the CARE tool. We plugged this into the CARE tool afterwards, and we looked at what we found. So as opposed to that detailed LCA, which took a couple of days, the CARE tool takes about 5 minutes, and really quickly and really simply, you're able to see pretty similar results. And so we see again here that when we add in the embodied and operational emissions, the reuse and addition yields fewer emissions, lower carbon footprint than even higher performance new construction over this 15 years. And when we look at the bottom chart, again, those emissions over time, that's because the embodied carbon of the renovation was so much lower than the embodied carbon of replacement construction that even if the new building is more efficient, it cannot pay back that upfront cost of embodied carbon for the first 15, 20, often more years. So for this particular project, through the year 2030, renovation compared to reuse has avoided over 4 million kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. So these are the kind of numbers that you can really easily get your hands on with the CARE tool. And you can also test variables to say, well, what if I can't achieve that level of energy use? Or what if, what if I need to do a deeper structural upgrades? You can really kind of quickly assess the impacts of those choices and also set targets for yourself. So having used the CARE tool quite a bit and worked with a lot of people who are using the CARE tool, we just have a few takeaways that we've started to collect. First, reusing large, really carbon intensive structures, things like masonry or steel, those are going to result in a lot higher carbon savings than reusing light wood frame structures, but that's still important. Operational emissions matter. It's not just about embodied carbon. We see this on every analysis that embodied emissions matter upfront, but if we do not address those operational emissions, we're sunk. We have to do both. And climate and grid fuel mix matter. The CARE tool allows you to look at grid decarbonization and electrification and the impact that has. And it's really important to understand that some of our intuition about good decisions might apply in one climate, might apply, for example, in Seattle, but not in Kentucky, so I think this makes sense, that's kind of intuitive, but it really plays out in the numbers that your emissions from your electricity grid, where your power comes from, and your climate really impact the strategies we need to use. Major structural upgrades can greatly reduce the carbon savings of reuse. This is another important one that we see, that because structure is so embodied carbon intensive, if you're in an area, or, for example, a facadectomy, if you're doing something where you're just saving the facade and replacing the entire structure, that might replace character on the street front, but you're not really saving a lot of embodied carbon. And then, of course, these savings compound at the portfolio scale, that addressing emissions in the built environment is really a challenge of scale. And so it's really important to make these decisions building by building, but to understand that it really adds up when we think about the 220 billion square meters of existing built environment we have globally. These are huge numbers we're dealing with. And lastly, again, I want to end with carbon isn't the only metric that matters. It is the only metric that the CARE tool will provide to you. But of course, we also need to think about other environmental measures like biodiversity and raw material extraction and many others. And then, of course, the human component of this, the social impacts and equity impacts as well. All right, so with that, I will end. Thank you.
Lori, thanks so much. What a great presentation. And just to restate, the CARE tool is caretool.org, and that's open and free to the public to use, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'll put that in the chat. Thanks, Cindy.
So anyone on the call who wants to play with it can feel free to do that. Lori, thank you so much. And Lori may have to sign off early here. So if you have questions for Lori, put them in the chat and we'll get them to Lori and she can respond to you via email. Lori, thanks again.
Thanks so much.
Next up is Arn. Arn, you want to share your screen? Perfect.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to take the next 20 minutes and talk about a very special project. It is the Henry W. Longfellow School that we converted to senior housing for our client Vesta Corporation, one of the region's leading affordable housing developers. They're actually based in Connecticut. Why this project is so significant is that saving this school was a result of the efforts of Cleveland Restoration Society. Now, that's an organization that I've been on the board for a long time. In 2017, Tony Heedy, who was then an accomplished architect with HDS and principal, came to me when he was president of CRS and said, look, as a fellow board member, we need to intervene because the Cleveland Metropolitan School District has been demolishing beautiful schools because they don't know what to do with the buildings. You know, populations decrease, so the need for especially elementary schools was going away in and around Cleveland's neighborhoods. And the Longfellow School was next on the docket to be demolished. In fact, a demolition permit had been secured. The demo contractor was engaged, and this project was about a month away from being demolished. It's located in the Collinwood neighborhood around East 140th. And it is in a neighborhood, it is central to a neighborhood with a very high concentration of home ownership, beautiful single family homes that are well maintained, which is not that prevalent in the Collinwood neighborhood. Also, Councilman Mike Polensek, Cleveland's longest tenured councilman, and former Councilman Jeff Johnson attended Longfellow School. So we approached Councilman Polensek with the idea of trying to approach the school district to save this school, which was built in 1923. And what ensued was 2 years of negotiations with the school district. So in my board position and as a co-chair of the task force to save Longfellow, our mission was to create a duplicatable game plan that CMSD could use for all the other elementary schools they had and other schools that they were planning on decommissioning or had already decommissioned. Because what happened to Longfellow once it was decommissioned is something we did not want any other school to have to go through. So I'm going to tell you the story of homeroom to home sweet home. And it's a very compelling story. We had a huge team at Maroos because eventually through an RFP process, Vesta was selected from a national group of respondents to an RFQ and an RFP that Tony and I had prepared. And then we had to recuse ourselves because we were on various teams. The Vesta team that included us as the design builder was selected. So we have at Maroos, we have integrated design build. So we had our in-house historian involved and we had LDA architects as our outside historical consultant. We had our entire design build group involved because our design build group has done, I don't know, 20 projects with Vesta about, I don't know, $400 or $500 million worth of work over the last 20 years. So we kept that team intact, but we had to really focus our efforts on this project. So let's quickly take a look at, this is the Longfellow School. It was designed by Walter McCormick and his firm. Walter McCormick is credited with creating a style of architecture that became known as the Cleveland style of school architecture. It became nationally known, but there are many, many schools in Cleveland, in and around Cleveland's neighborhoods that look just like Longfellow. Large brick and stone structures, ornate copper roofs, and towers, a lot of corbelling, a great deal of detailing in the brick masonry itself. So once the school opened around 1925-26, here's just some historic pictures. Now, one thing to note is the neighborhood around the school has always been culturally and racially diverse. And you can see from this picture that this was a culturally and racially diverse school. In 2010, Cleveland Metropolitan School District slated the Henry Longfellow School to be demolished. I'm sorry, to be decommissioned and closed. So this is a picture of the elementary school students right before the closure. Now, years later, this was how overgrown the structure became. All kinds of trees. Coincidentally, in the foreground, you see a couple of huge oaks. These are two of the largest trees in Cleveland and two of the oldest. They're 300 years old. This shows once we cleared the underbrush and trees away, what was left and all the vines on the building and how much deterioration there had been. Windows were boarded up, mostly. We're showing you how the gym used to be used and some architectural features like the Owl of Knowledge, how the auditorium was used and how the front entrance looked. And now I'm going to start showing you what we found in 2017 when we were able to gain access to the school in an effort to save the school. What CMSD did as a matter of practice is when they decommissioned the school, they left everything in there. Desks, books, lockers, they just abandoned the building in place. And they tried to keep it secure. But in this case, they were unsuccessful. Vandals cut a huge hole in the roof to scavenge copper and cast iron pipe. They left the hole open and CMSD was unaware for 3 years. this incredibly beautiful ornate interior was damaged extensively. This is after a cleanup occurred, before we could even start construction. But as you can see from the outside, the building was pretty derelicted. Here's some more pictures of the auditorium area, some of the hallway areas, all the plaster that's asbestos laden, which was on the floor. Now, here's the problem. When the vandals came in over time and the knuckleheads and they scavenged the pipes, they made all the asbestos friable. So the entire building was contaminated and everything in it was contaminated. So for the first time in my career, and I'm old, you know, I've been doing this 40 some years, I had to actually put on a hazmat suit to enter this building because we told CMSD that we needed to enter the building and it would need to be cleaned up before any developers would be interested. CMSD, understand at this point, was very, very reluctant to give us a stay of execution for the building. What was easiest for them was just to demolish it. But even CMSD didn't realize the extent of the abatement that would be required, because even to demolish the building, it would have to be abated. So we donned hazmat suits. A team of us from CRS and Mike Polensik and Jeff Johnson went through the building literally with respirators. And this is better than what we saw because this is after cleaning up. You see how much water damage is in the building. So after a very lengthy and difficult negotiation with CMSD, we told the school district that on the basis and on the stake of our reputation and Marusa's experience, we promised them that we would be able to find a developer, maybe not locally, but nationally, who would be willing to take on saving this school and repurposing it. So why is this so important? If you understand Cleveland's history, you realize that elementary schools became central cultural, social hubs for each of the neighborhoods. They were stabilizing factors and influences. And where CMSD had abandoned schools, those neighborhoods deteriorated. Statistical fact, crime rates increased. And the neighborhood around Longfellow was so stable and so secure, and we didn't want to see that happen. And we knew we could show CMSD a better way. So Vesta Corporation was selected to and entrusted as the successful respondent to a national RFQ and RFP process to purchase the building from CMSD and convert it to senior housing. They were selected by the school and by CMSD and by Cleveland Restoration Society because Vesta was willing to purchase the building, which by the way cost $1. They were willing to purchase the building and the 5 acres it sat on immediately and not wait to closing, which was going to take a couple of years. They were the only respondent out of the 4 shortlists who were willing to take the risk on. And Vesta took the care to stabilize the school and make sure through Marus that we boarded all the openings, all the exposed openings up, with the stipulation that the school board would use the funds that they were going to use for demolition, at least take some of those funds and use them and clean up the inside of the building and do the asbestos abatement. Eventually, the school board agreed, and we were on our way. Now, school buildings are very, very inefficient for housing. They're beautiful, but they're inefficient. Hallways are 9 to 15 feet wide typically, and in most residential multifamily residential projects, you know, the hallways are 6 feet wide, at most 8 feet. And because of state historic preservation requirements or SHPO requirements, a lot of the contributing elements, the elements that contributed to the historical fabric and nature of the building, could not be altered. This was a very arduous negotiation because we were also going to be using low-income housing tax credits to create senior affordable housing on this site. And we knew that we could only get 30 units of new housing inside the existing school building, and that's not a financeable project. So we knew that on the remaining 5 acres, we would have to build a project that was new construction and somehow get SHPO and the Ohio Housing Finance Agency to agree on how it looked and how it functioned. And then we had the more difficult task of financing the project. So we came up with a solution, and this is some of the Revit model and Lumion modeling that we did of the existing Longfellow School in the foreground and addition in the background. Now, it was very important to the State Historic Preservation Office that the new addition, which is linked by a link that will show you. In fact, you can see it in the lower right, that the new building became a backdrop. It kind of faded away so that all the emphasis and attention would be on the new building. So we're starting to show you some during construction pictures. You can see some befores of certain areas. The suites were actually threaded and fit very nicely into the existing demised classroom spaces. We, however, wanted to preserve the chalkboards and some of the millwork so that they're actually part of the residential units. And we'll look at some really cool pictures. Now, the financing for this project was incredibly complex. It's one of the things that we at Marus helped our client Vesta with. This project, because this project's on the National Register, we had to get Part 2 approved, where SHPO and the National Park Service would approve the scope of work, and OFA would approve the project. But we knew the magic number was we had to get at least 80, and in fact, we got 82 units, 30 in the old building and 52 units of senior affordable housing in the new building. And that there had to be, because of the aging nature of the population that lives here, we had to have a way for them to use the community spaces largely located in the old structure. They needed to get there easily and simply and traverse that through very clear paths with great wayfinding from the old building to the new building out of the weather. The financing of this project used 9% low-income housing tax credits, and then for the first time in Ohio, we found a way to also use 4% low-income housing tax credits at the same time through a very complex legal structure that kind of subdivided the property in half the buildings. We also use state and federal historic tax credits, city grants, housing trust fund dollars in all to pull this off. It took $24 million of sources to satisfy $16 million worth of construction plus all the other uses. Now, the window openings in this building are 9 feet tall. SHPO insisted that we not replace the windows. When we talk about energy efficiency in preserving old structures, we would prefer, in most instances, to put new windows in, whether they be wood or aluminum, because they're much more energy efficient. In this case, SHPO insisted, as a condition of approval of the project, that we refurbish these windows, which is very difficult. You have to take the sashes out and number each one of them, restore them. All the putty was hot, meaning we had to take all those individual glass lights had to be removed, cleaned, the frames cleaned, the asbestos abated from them, and then completely reglazed. However, this would not meet the requirements, the energy efficiency requirements of enterprise green communities, which we had to meet and pass because of all the funding streams and city and tax credit money in the project. Therefore, we had to create a way to put storm windows, which SHPO would not allow on the outside of the building, on the inside of the building. So we had a number of challenges, which we overcame. We're showing you some in-progress pictures here of, we were looking at different ways to clean up the floor and how it could look, and if we should stain it dark or bring it back to the light oak look. And that floor is in fact white oak, or maple. We had parapet pieces that we actually wanted to clean, and we were testing how we were going to clean them. We did a lot of mock-ups. So now I'm going to show you in progress and then the completed senior housing units and how they look. And you can see the blackboard still in place. You can see the cubby still in place at the front entry. That was actually where students would put their assignments, their homework assignments, or their book bags. And you can see how how beautifully the windows have been restored. So these are the before and afters, July 2018, and then July 2023 at occupancy, how the building looks. This is the site before and after. We had tremendous accessibility challenges here because obviously in 2019-23, the building was designed without thinking about handicap or barrier-free access. we had to install handrails and still meet the requirements of the National Park Service and Department of the Interior's that still met accessibility requirements. We had to figure out how to get an elevator in this building and how to get a ramp into the building. So we figured both out, but we actually there were storage rooms that stacked, and we threaded the elevator through the storage rooms. So there's the elevator. Now we also had to keep all the doors in the hallway, and you can see how we did that. Stairs are particularly challenging, especially handrails on stairs, because they were usually too low. So we actually had to raise the handrails. We also were not allowed to remove, see where it says girls' toilet, we were not allowed to remove the little signs in the hall because they were considered part of the historic fabric. So we found cute ways to keep them. And we also kept all the doors. The auditorium became a community space that's very well used. But in all this space between the new and the existing to meet current NFPA code, we actually had to thread sprinklers into the space. We also had to remove very, very old boiler systems. And we actually cut these up and used old coal chutes to get everything out. And when we removed the boiler space, we were actually able to infill the floor and create 2 additional units that are really cool. So we didn't compromise any of the historic circulation and we were able to save other monumental spaces in the building. Repairing these windows was incredibly challenging. It took a lot of room inside the building just to create kind of a wood shop to do this. And the actual window restoration took about 4 months. Now, we had to meet her standards for Enterprise Green Community. So we had to use very high efficiency heating and cooling equipment for each unit. It has its own temperature control. It has its own HVAC units. We also had lead paint issues, and the lead paint regulations changed. So in 2021, between 2018, we started in 2021, we actually had to do a lot more lead abatement in the building. Now, nature also took its toll in this building. Sometime after the school was decommissioned in 2010, lightning struck the boiler chimney and did significant damage. So in 2022, we had completed restoring this chimney back to the original drawings, which we found. As you can see, we repaired it. It took a tremendous amount of work. And then, before we got lightning protection installed in July, it was in 2022, it was struck again. And you can see the devastating damage that was done to that part of the building. So in 2023, after the insurance company fought, we finally got to restore the chimney for the second time and then install lightning protection in a number of areas on the building. Linking the old building to the new was something that we debated with SHPO very vociferously. We wanted to do an all glass link. We thought it would be really cool to just have a transparent link, and they wanted exactly the opposite. They wanted a very solid link to get people from the new building on the right to the old building on the left. So what we did is we went through a series of renderings and worked with SHPO to create the link. The link was created as its own standalone building, and we had to find out how to join the link to the old facade of the auditorium to the new building. So from the inside, there's actually a very cool way to do that, because there were areaways in the outside of the old auditorium, and we actually preserved those. And there's a unit actually that gets indirect light from there and natural light from the other side. We also put the resident mailboxes there, and this is kind of the central gathering space between the buildings. So we had to create a new building. It has 52 units just to meet the needs of the financial requirements for the project to make it feasible. There was also bird habitats that had to be maintained. Those birds live in these 2 large trees, which were 2 of the oldest trees in the city of Cleveland, which we were able to preserve. So I'm going to wrap up by saying that we started out at Cleveland Restoration Society to prove to CMSD and to the city of Cleveland that historic schools, which are so central to the social and cultural fabric of neighborhoods in and around Cleveland and in other cities too, that we could create a duplicatable blueprint to save and adaptively reuse and give new life to a school to a different purpose. And we could do it successfully, and it could be repeated. And as a result of Longfellow, as it was going on, CMSD and the city of Cleveland put out RFQs and RFPs to save 12 structures, which are currently being saved. So we consider that an even bigger win than providing affordable, wonderful, low-cost senior housing for the neighbor residents. By the way, there's 7 or 8 people who formerly owned houses who have given the houses to their kids who now live at the Longfellow. So I'm going to stop here because I said I'd go 20 minutes. And if you have any questions later, happy to answer those.
Arn, thank you, and congratulations on such a wonderful project. Those before and after pictures are just stunning. Really wonderful job. Thanks
Thank
for a great presentation, and I want to bring you back to hear about the other 12 that are going on.
Happy to do so. We're involved in.
Great. So our next speaker is Brant Miller. Brant, let's turn it over to you. So Arn, if you can stop sharing. And then Brant, if you can start sharing.
Great. Hello, everybody. I'm Brant Miller. I'm an architect at DLR Group, and thank you for having us here today to talk about our project at the Sandusky State Theater. So the Sandusky State Theater was originally built in 1929. It was built as a vaudeville theater and a movie house. The full entertainment center with a bowling alley and billiards room in the basement. In 1982, it was added to the National Park Service's Historic Register. Its noted significance was that it was typical of a late 20s movie palace with all the details and embellishments that you'd find there, canvas sky, wall murals, columns, and arches. The Sandusky State Theater is located in Sandusky, Ohio. It is 1 block off of Sandusky Bay, which is part of Lake Erie. The historic building itself includes this audience chamber, an 85-foot tall stage house, and then a 1-story historic dressing room that served the stage house. The night of June 10th, 2020, there was a large storm that came through the area. A wind gust came off the lake and it completely destroyed the 85-foot stage house. Spread all over the street, collapsed the first kind of 2 bays within the audience chamber. And because this was June of 2020, it was somewhat fortunate timing because everybody was still at home with COVID. So nobody was in the building, nobody was in the area. In a way, it was maybe the best time this could have happened. The local newspaper from that day wrote, "As of today, it's not known if the building can be saved. We're assessing the damage, but it's too early to tell what the loss will be. It's a devastating day for the theater, its volunteers, staff, board, and for Sandusky. If there's one thing I know, it's that Sandusky is resilient and has its eyes on the future. We are honored to be part of its past and look forward to being part of the future." So these pictures on the left are when we first arrived at the site after they started clearing out the debris. All that was left was the proscenium arch with its concrete structure that you can see. But standing within the auditorium, it was really the surreal experience of seeing sky and daylight into the theater, as well as all the rubble that had infilled the orchestra pit. So our first phase of the project was to help to stabilize the building. So this included new steel and reinforcing, a new roof for those 2 bays that had collapsed, rebuilding the back proscenium wall, and then enclosing the opening into the theater with the goal to make it warm, safe, and dry while the theater decided what their next steps would be. And so this was an opportunity for them to decide how to move forward. So they needed to stabilize both the building, but then also the program of the theater. Running a theater is a difficult business. You have a single performance space, and you also have kind of changing demographics as far as theater goers. So when they wanted to rethink of how to build this, how could they add variety to program and diversify their revenue stream moving forward? There were 3 parts of the theater. So this red outline is the historic footprint. Because it was built as a movie theater and vaudeville stage, the total stage depth historically was only about 24 feet from the proscenium wall to back wall. And to expand kind of the size of shows that they wanted to do to be able to bring in Broadway shows, they wanted to expand that to a full kind of 50-foot deep stage house. They also had purchased a building adjacent to them that they were using as a community room that was to be renovated right outside of the historic structure. And then there was opportunity to add on to the building to add that new program. So the storm disaster actually created a financial opportunity that they may not have had. There was insurance related to the storm. They were able to tap into state and federal historic tax credits. And then they also had a very dedicated community. People who lived in Sandusky, people who used to live in Sandusky, local businesses, all wanted to bring this theater back to what they remembered of it from their childhood. So when we first approached this architecturally, we started looking into the history of Sandusky. And there are 2 things that kind of found its way into our project. So as Sandusky was being formed as a city in the late 1800s, early 1900s, one of their main industries was actually ice block harvesting. So people would go out to Lake Erie, they would carve out these enormous ice blocks, and then they would ship them by train as far south as New Orleans. And this was before kind of standard heating and cooling to keep buildings cool. The other kind of interesting historical piece of Sandusky was that Charles Frohman, who was the original producer of Peter Pan, was from Sandusky. And so kind of using these 2 stories, these kind of materialized into what was eventually, you'll see as our building, through this kind of large crack block, which finds its way into the addition, and then the idea of the discovery, wonder, and magic from the Peter Pan story. So looking at the new program, it was going to be a restoration of the 1,500-seat theater, and then also giving them a second performance venue, which we're calling the second venue. So that could be more contemporary theater, small groups, music, jazz, comedy, something so they're not relying only on their single venue. Within the community room, an art gallery will be at the front. And between those 2 spaces, concessions area and the much expanded restrooms, which is always important in a theater. And historically, there's never enough. At the front of the building, a bar was going to be put in one of the storefronts, which aptly will be named Frohman. And then above the second venue and bridging over these historic dressing rooms that we're restoring, we have the mezzanine of the second venue that extends into a roof terrace, which gives them kind of a third space for events. So the way we kind of see this theater is that you have the historic theater with its kind of modern counterpoint bridged together by these shared areas. And so this is looking at the massing with the historic renovation. This line represents where the original stage house is and where it would be expanded. And then the modern addition kind of tucked behind the building, approach from the back. So getting into the theater space, the top two images are what the theater looked like before the storm. There was a renovation that was done in the 90s. And some of what was happening is there's muted colors. It wasn't necessarily kind of tying completely back to the original. So when we approached this, we kind of dug through images and photos that we could find from the original theater, and we wanted to bring back kind of that life and those details and that luster and kind of contrast that they had when it was first built in the 20s. So to do this within the theater, we had kind of two main ideas. One was the idea of the calm before the storm. So bringing some of this new history of the theater into the venue. So instead of the blue sky with the puffy clouds, we really kind of imagined it as this twilight sky during golden hour with kind of that high contrast where the lake is still kind of glimmering light from the waves. And then we wanted to give it a sense of place. So historically, theaters were designed so you feel like you're going to another place. The murals are often kind of Italianate gardens or feeling like you're going to another part of the world. But we wanted this to feel very much like it was a theater that was part of the community, part of the lake, and here. We worked with Evergreen Architectural Arts. We've worked with them on kind of many of our theater projects, locally at Playhouse Square, but also all over the country. And they help define or refine kind of the idea, the color palette, worked with us in SHPO to determine kind of the new details and reconstructed details and scheme of the theater. Within the audience chamber itself, there were some modern theater needs that we had to address that were a little different from when it was built in the 20s. So the consideration of ADA, accessibility, patron comfort with kind of larger, better space seating, as well as flexibility in the theater. So the first 6 rows of the theater, these chairs are removable. So that enables them to do things like a large concert with a standing room section up front. Also, with all the seats in, you have a typical Broadway performance. And then at the back of the theater, usually some of the least desirable seats, these built up boxes with loose seating that gives them kind of other opportunities to, and other choices within the theater for seating. So working with Evergreen, they developed kind of the idea of these murals, giving it more of a local feel, kind of with the flora and the connection to the lake, the sky that wraps from wall to wall, and this, instead of kind of the 3 distinct pieces that they were before. And then below are kind of those concept renderings that we were working with. Working with Evergreen, you're really working with artists and sculptors and painters. So they're unlike any other kind of contractor you'll work with on a job. They make these molds in their shop for the big pieces, but also any day on a site visit, you'll see people hand sculpting the tiny details of plaster, or layering on paints by hand very specifically in every kind of joint and detail line, and providing multiple glazes as they go through. So it's an incredible experience always working with them. So this is a photo that I took a week ago on site. This is the progress of the theater. So Evergreen has mostly kind of completed their portion of the work with the reconstructed columns and screen, the murals, the damask panels on the wall, and the Barocco fountains returned back in place. And some more details of the theater development. I believe in the next few weeks, the seats will start being placed within the theater. Then I want to touch briefly on the new addition. So with the historical standards, the idea of a new addition to a theater, it's not dependent on style, but it wants to be a balance between the differentiation and compatibility with the historic structure. So the back of this building is all red brick, and you'll see in another image. The front of the building is all yellow brick. Back at the time, yellow brick was a premium material, so it was reserved for kind of the main front street. So as we turn the corner, it transitions to the red common brick. And so the material of the new addition is a kind of terracotta colored TFRC panel to feel kind of at place with that. We also wanted this to feel kind of more open and airy and light than the historical theater, as the program and the types of events that they'll be putting on here could benefit from that. The main space within the new addition is that second venue. So you can kind of see the performance stage. This is looking from the mezzanine with the roof terrace out here. We also wanted to bring in as much natural light as we could into this space, but we're able to control it kind of through the deep massing of the addition. And then the brick that you see in the background and the brick here, this is a historic dressing room that we're bridging over. We didn't want to cover that up. We want you to still have a sense that you're at the theater, that you can kind of read that volume past you. And to the right, this is kind of those historic dressing rooms that, you know, have taken a serious effort to stabilize and save and preserve. For the kind of other new spaces, the concessions and Croman's Bar, we're pulling from the original kind of points of architecture with the framed arch motif. And then as part of this project, we were also able to replace kind of all HVAC systems in the building to prioritize energy efficiency and patron comfort, as well as removing the inefficient energy systems, such as the steam boilers that were part of the original building. So this is a progress shot from that same day. So they are beginning construction on the new addition now. The stage house is complete, and this is within the new expanded full stage. And we are targeting completion of this project this fall. Thank you.
Thanks, Brant. What a wonderful project. Really great to see that they decided to bring that back. Perfect. Let's move to our last speaker, Jared Freeman. Jared, are you ready?
Yep, I'm getting there. You can see my screen, right?
No, not yet.
Oh. Um. Okay.
Here it comes. There you are.
Okay. Great. All right. I am Jared Freeman, General Manager at Marus Brothers, in our design build group. I want to thank you all for being here, allowing me to tell the story of Hotel Cleveland. Share some of the history, which I'm really going to focus, a lot of this on the history of the building versus the construction renovation part. But the second half, I will talk about that. So, and really talk about the improvements that we've made in the property over the last 8 years. We've been working with Skyline Investments from Toronto. They own hotels in Canada and the United States. Just trying to get to the point where we're at today. So I'll go through some of the early site history, building history, along with the importance of its historic preservation and continued use, while also calling attention to some of the physical improvements we've done in regards to tying in with energy consumption, water usage, and the heat island effect type stuff. And really, talking about some of the sustainability improvements we've made along with just the construction of the building. All right. So Marus Brothers has been involved since 2016, when we began working on the design through our architectural department. We are architect of record on the building, recognizing the value that many perspectives have. Obviously, we have various consultants and engineers that were important. The Brugger Company has been integral to the building for us since the beginning, doing all of the MEP design, as well as being the mechanical design builder for the project. Colin McCartan is a designer out in New York City. He has done all of the great interior renovation designs through us as the architect. So our primary personnel is listed on the page, which is really our office personnel for design build. However, our carpentry group is on site as well. I mean, we've had probably 100 to 200 different Marus Brothers employees touch this project throughout the years. So in 2018, when we started, we upgraded the heating and cooling in the guest rooms and the guest room level corridors, which is 5 through 14. I'll show you that. In that year, we also replaced a lot of the roofing, skylights, and lighting in most of the spaces. The bulk of the renovation started in 22 and will be completed this year. We have about 3 floors left of rooms. We just completed the public spaces, and the hotel just turned its name to Hotel Cleveland 2 days ago. So that was a good milestone for them and for the project. And I'll go through some of the photos in the second half of the presentation. So just starting with the history of the hotel. When you think of Cleveland and its downtown, it is hard to think of a time when we didn't have Terminal Tower as a landmark structure. After all, Terminal Tower was the tallest building in the United States outside of New York City at the time of its construction. So on the left, you can see the Terminal Tower, you can see Municipal Stadium, and you can see the railroad tracks that go under this, that were visible at the time and now are pretty much under street structures in the city. It's kind of cool to see that. The slide's not moving. There we go. All right, so the Terminal Tower is iconic and easily recognizable in Cleveland. But prior to its construction, it was part of something called the Terminal Group Plan. And on the property, the first part of that was the Hotel Cleveland, which was built on the site of Maury's Tavern, and later referred to as the Cleveland House, eventually the City Hotel, before it was destroyed by a fire in 1845. So here on the left, you can see Hotel Cleveland before Terminal Tower was in existence. And then on the right, there's a historic plaque inside the building that talks about what was there before the building was built. So rebuilt in 1848 is the Dunham House and enlarged in 1852. Again, the building stood, was a current hotel. It was named the Forest City House. So the Forest City House is a hotel located on the corner of Superior and Monumental Park in the heart of downtown. So Monumental Park, shown here, is obviously public square now. So just cool to see the transformation of that area and how it looks, and just a beautiful hotel that was there prior to the Hotel Cleveland being there. In 1916, Forest City House was demolished and replaced by Hotel Cleveland, which opened December 16th, 1916. So you can see postcards of what it looked like. There's no terminal tower there. It's a very, very large hotel for that area. Obviously fits now. So by the late 20s, there was a group called the Van Swergen Brothers. They had a building, they wanted to build a vision to kind of create this Union Terminal Group plan. It involved 7 office and public buildings, including the one skyscraper, which is Terminal Tower. Buildings were arranged in a kind of a triangular area over 15-acre site. So you can see in 1927, construction of the building. Looking at these pictures was fascinating. I'd never seen them before I did this presentation, so it was kind of eye-opening. So facing Public Square to the north, or the Terminal Tower and the Union Station with the Higbee Building over here, on the east corner, Ontario, Hotel Cleveland on the west on Superior Avenue. These 3 connected buildings are separate from the rest of the group by Prospect to the south. And then facing Prospect is 3 buildings from east to west, or the Republic Building, Guildhall and Midland Post Office, and then separated by an open block. And then you have the US Post Office building here. So the entire complex was built on the air rights over the railroad terminal, with the tracks passing underneath, which is how it is today. You got RTA going underneath there, and you can see it when you can really see, and we kind of deal with it as part of this building, because Hotel Cleveland, part of it is over top of the railroad tracks, at least the parking garage part of it. And so in 1962, 5-story building and parking garage, the parking garage and ballroom was added to the west side of the hotel. It's a smooth windowless structure. It doesn't intrude excessively on the character of the Union Terminal Group plan design of those buildings. So the parking garage and ballroom, obviously they provide a lot of programming and amenity space. That ballroom still used today on an almost weekly basis. That parking garage is still vital to the hotel. It's not a whole, especially with Sherwin-Williams going up across the street. There's a lot less parking in that area. So you can see here, it's kind of cool. Like you can see the hotel without the parking garage and what it looked like. These first 2 windows in the corner are still seen through one of the ballrooms, the Ambassador Ballroom. And then, you know, what it looks like today, obviously without the Sheridan Ballroom sign on there. But still like that today. So just as the site had many previous structures, the 14-story hotel has operated under many different brands and names through the years. When it was first constructed, it was a 1,000-room hotel. But later, interior remodels and space transformations, today it functions as a 491-room hotel within the historic building envelope. In the mid-1950s, the hotel was acquired by Sheridan, operated until 1977. In 78, the hotel was renamed the Stouffer Tower City Plaza. And then in 93, the ownership changed again. It was named into the Renaissance Cleveland Hotel, which was what it was until a couple days ago. So here are a few changes to the building entrance and canopy throughout the years, 1920s, 1940s, and then the 1990s, and much like it is today. On the following slides, I'll get into some more recent work that we've been involved with. in the building throughout through the ownership. And it is, you know, we're turning this into an autograph called Marriott Autograph Collection Hotel, which is the highest level in Marriott's brand as Hotel Cleveland. So before I get to the number of slides that show current changes we've made, I'd like to just bring us back to the overall topic of discussion, which is retrofitting and historic structure. Unlike a lot of buildings we work on, this building has always been an operating hotel. It's been remodeled a number of times, which becomes evident when you open up walls throughout the different floors. We've found a lot of interesting stuff left behind, I guess. This building doesn't necessarily fall into the adaptive reuse category because it was never adapted from another building type. However, it's a very important preservation project. The fact that the current owners have funded and invested so much into this project is a testament to how important the building is and how valuable it is to the city of Cleveland. The environmental sustainability improvements for this building really come down to 4 items. And those are, you know, continued use and enhancement of the existing structure in lieu of demolishing and replacing a new. So, you know, the first speaker had talked about how important replacing new, you know, renovating new buildings is, and that's exactly what we did here, keeping this building. Preserving the historic fabric and reestablishing the hotel's prominence in public square. I think that's hugely important and hopefully can last for another 100 years. High-end aesthetic finishes, placemaking experiences now found within the building truly embody the branding and caliber of a Marriott Autograph Hotel. And then upgrading the energy efficient systems and services to reduce operational waste and redundancies throughout the building. I think this is a good quote. I don't know who said it, but retrofitting a historic building to meet modern standards while preserving its architectural character requires creativity, ingenuity, and a deep understanding of construction techniques, both old and new. So that is really what embodies historical rehab. I've been involved in probably at least 10 historic rehabs in my career. And the team, every time, that is the essence of what we're doing. And they take a lot of effort, but they always come out way greater than brand new buildings do. So how do we upgrade while preserving this 106-year-old building? New white reflective roof with better insulation. We did that back in 2018. New historically compatible windows. The original windows were, well, the last windows, not original. The last windows that were there were single pane aluminum windows. Now they are double pane, which improves energy efficiency. And then also sound off the street. They were having a terrible time with sound. In fact, when the World Series was here, the Chicago Cubs were staying there. And after the first home series, the Cubs decided not to stay there anymore because the sounds of the street were bothering them too much. So they ended up moving hotels, which is kind of a funny story. The ballroom air handling unit replacement, there was 7 units. Now they're down to 3 obviously high efficiency units. Supplies ballroom air to the ballroom and a lot of the surrounding spaces. The restaurant air handling unit, same, much more efficient unit, kind of serves that the restaurant, which was San Sushi. Now they're going to call Maori's is the new name of that, and the lobby area. Guest room HVAC, we did that back in 2018. Put in wireless thermostats, controls the temperature. It lets it get warmer in the summer, cooler in the winter when a guest isn't in the room. The hotel can control that as guests check in and then make the temperature in the room to what it needs to be. So it has those capabilities to save energy from that. Low flow plumbing fixtures throughout this renovation, and then LED lighting with more efficient lighting control. So probably about 90% of the lights in the building we've replaced in this renovation. All of the front of the house stuff, anything a guest can see has been replaced. The stuff that would remain is some of the back of house areas that we didn't touch throughout. And then just general repairs. I mean, it was a mess of leaking pipes and insulation. Obviously, the maintenance staff does what they can in that building. They do a great job. But there's only so much they can do with the budgets that they have on a year-over-year basis. So we helped to fix a lot of that. And then this historical rehab not only honors its hotel's legacy through rebranding and interior design, but also promoting sustainability. It takes considerably more energy to create a new building. Through the concept of embodied energy, it saves energy and preserves an old one. So I think that's important statement there. So now I'm going to go through just some of, the comparisons of what it looked like to what it looks like today. And some of these pictures were taken a couple of days ago, so it's real time. So here you can see, this is an old building from historic times, and this is today. So we really put back these windows to match what they looked like originally, and then cleaned up the facade. There was awnings on there that we removed. The roof was an EPDM, black EPDM roof. Is now a white fluid applied roof, actually, that we did back in 2018. And you can see we added some ductwork to the top because we did work in the corridors. We put skylights, brand new skylights over the atrium part of the roof. Skylights everywhere are all brand new. So obviously more energy efficient than what the old ones were. This just shows a window up close. And then you can see the awnings that we got rid of and the Renaissance R's that we got rid of to kind of bring back the historical facade. This is the completed facade. We did tuck pointing, structural repairs, terracotta repairs. We used actual terracotta, and not GFRC or GFRG in creating and repairing a lot of these cornices. And wash the building, obviously, bring it back to its original. This was an area, this is what the bar looked like prior in the lobby. You have the old marble fountain, if anyone has been in that building and remembers that. It hadn't had water in it probably 3 or 4 years because it was leaking into the space below. So we got rid of that. Again, the fountain, kind of out, obviously it's outdated. At some point they painted this ceiling blue. Whatever that was about, but here is, oops. So here's what the bar looks like today. I went too far. Here's what the bar looks like today. We really incorporated, that fountain was right in the middle here. We really incorporated that bar into the style of the room. You have limestone or gray limestone columns from original, and all the walls obviously retained all of that. We found that stone in a quarry in Tennessee that we use for a lot of the floors in the public spaces. So it's that same stone. They closed that quarry for a number of years. They reopened it, and so we went and got that product to put back into this. Repainted the white on the ceilings, kept the gold. Added new chandeliers, and obviously very elegant furniture for the space. Another picture kind of showing more. Added some carpet to the space. Really, it's going to reinvigorate. That lobby was hardly used, and now it's going to be a focal point of the whole hotel. This is an old picture that shows the blue ceilings and kind of the same perspective. Kept all the brass railings, refurbished them, kept all the wood handrails, refurbished all those to really bring it back to what it was intended to be. There was a elevated platform in that lobby that caused some wheelchair access issues and all of that. We removed all of that, went down to the original floor, original level that lobby had. Another picture, this is where that bar was. Now it's a private dining room. We put a glass removable wall in there. Just more pictures of what that lobby looks like. You can see these windows. They had them covered up with drapery. We really reopened all of it to bring the light into the room and really show off that room instead of making it dark. Here's the front desk area, just the old carpet. And now it is Nice wood paneling, really kind of fits better with the age and the motif of kind of what the atmosphere in that place is supposed to look like. Here's an old corridor with, I don't know, this bright carpet that doesn't really fit, I don't think, to what corridors look like now. Which I think is much more appropriate. A room, you got the old room versus the new room, just brighten them up. We added murals. There's 3 different murals, and they're paintings of the city of Cleveland in the late 1700s, early 1800s. It's interesting when you go in and look at some of them, and you can see the Cuyahoga River, and you can see some of what was there and what some of the areas that are there now. There's actually, in some of them, there's some buildings that are still present, which is kind of cool. Again, old building or old room versus a new room. Second floor, pre-function space. Obviously it was kind of tired before, and now it's reinvigorated. Main lobby, you can see that stone that we found to match what was there originally. Again, another just pictures of some common spaces that we upgraded. Like I said before, all the lights, all the chandeliers, everything is brand new, with LED and proper lighting controls and all that. The boardrooms had original wood paneling that we kept. So really in these rooms, all we did was clean them up, carpet, paint, new lighting, new AV controls, so they're a little more modern. The gold room, this is a smaller ballroom in that building, just brightened it up. They've been using it for the last couple of months. Everybody that has come to that hotel is just really impressed by the new spaces. We have some murals of the city, kind of input into those walls. And those are from the early 1900s, late 1800s. You can see the Forest City House is in one of them. So it brings back the Ambassador Ballroom, and these are the 2 windows that used to be able to see outside. So we brought those. They used to kind of hide them, and we kind of brought them into focus there. So that's really it. Obviously, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them. Oh, there we go. And been great talking to everyone about this great project.
Jared, thanks so much, and congrats on a wonderful project. I haven't been in that hotel in years, and it's stunning what you've done with that. Just absolutely stunning. I need to visit again.
Yeah, you should. It's going to be open. The bar will be open, I believe, in a couple of weeks. So the hotel itself is moving into the space as we speak. So
Maybe we can talk you into doing a tour for us.
we could do that. It'd be great.
I'm recording this session. You're on tape. Okay, let's move to questions. Type your questions in the chat. And let's see, I'm sorry, I have not been monitoring the chat, so let's take a quick look. Megan asks, regarding Longfellow, can you speak to how senior housing was chosen as the new program for the reuse?
I can speak to that. The city of Cleveland in general, and that neighborhood in particular, had a complete lack of affordable options for seniors, and it was causing a migration out of that neighborhood to go somewhere else, which is very disruptive to a senior's life. So we wanted to create an option that met the demand. The waiting list was full 6 months before we ever finished that project, and the waiting list is double the number of units right now that we have available. That's how big the demand is in Collinwood for senior affordable housing.
Wow, very cool. Thank you, Arn. Chris Toddy asks, Hotel Cleveland, the R circles, looks like these were windows. Can or are these windows being replaced or recreated?
So the R's were not windows; they were stone behind them. So you can see in that last slide that I had, It's really, they were just stone circles. So we took those off and refurbished, cleaned that stone up behind it. So it is as it is as it is. They were never windows.
Okay, thanks. Beth just says amazing and fabulous. Thank you. Anne says those chandeliers are incredible. Where did you get those stunning lights?
We had them all custom made. Most of the vendors on the project for FF&E were based here in the United States. We didn't get much from overseas because of a lot of the material issues and delivery issues. And the timing that we needed for this, we needed a quick turnaround. So a lot of this stuff was made New York City and some other areas, in the United States. So, but they were all custom made for this project. Our interior designer created all of it.
Wasn't this Bob Halper's company that we did a lot of this with?
No, it's a company out of New York called Stephen. I forget the guy's name, but no, that we had a expediter purchaser out of New York that helped us kind of organize all of this. And Colin McCartan has vendors from all over that do specialize in different things.
Cool, thank you. Beth, yes, the recording will be available. It'll be posted on our Cleveland 2030 district website under district library. But you need to give me a day to get the YouTube transferred and posted, but it'll be there. Any other questions, please jot them in the chat. And I'm going to also ask the presenters if you would put if you wish, put your contact information in the chat. So we will also post the chat if anyone wants to get a hold of you and ask questions at a later date, they can do that. Jared, I'm curious about how you found that stone. That seems like an impossible task.
Yeah, it was, we knew it was Tennessee limestone, just all the research, and then went back to find out if the quarry was still there. It had been shut down in the 40s, and reopened recently in the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. So they were mining that stone again, and it was just we just happened to get lucky, really, that it was still available.
Yeah, no kidding. How fortuitous that, I mean, that's like crazy. You're doing this project and they reopened.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, terrific. Any other questions from the group? While we're waiting for any more questions to come in, I will ask the group, do any of you have any metrics on energy savings before it or after? And I know in some cases, like Longfellow, you probably didn't have any baseline. So any idea how much energy will be saved over similar buildings, so to speak?
I don't have any, like we probably can get them from the hotel now that we are really up and running and the systems are done. I'm sure that's some information we can gain. Like I said, Brewer Garrett's our partner on that from the mechanical side. They can do a lot of that. And I can see if they're measuring that or not. It has to be. So.
And so I can tell you that we did another building right around the corner from the Renaissance a few years ago, the Standard building that converted the old locomotive engineering union building to residential. That energy savings was 61%. That's how that was the energy efficiency increase. And I know that because we had a PACE loan grant on the project. So it was over 60% energy savings by replacing the windows, by changing out all the old antiquated systems, and by insulating the building.
Wow, that's fabulous. Yeah, and that's part of what the Cleveland 2030 district does too for our buildings. We measure progress from baseline when projects do upgrades and renovations. So, and Brewer Garrett is one of our partners as well. Um,
The problem with Longfellow, as I said, is we never had a baseline because it was decommissioned.
sure.
Uh, So we know that it was highly energy inefficient when it was operating as a school. We know that just because the building's uninsulated, terrible windows, and the boiler, it was just such an inefficient delivery model for steam radiation. So
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it's much, much more energy efficient today. We have another question here. How has the state of Ohio's legislation prohibiting pairing low income and historic tax credits impacted the business?
that's a wonderful question. It's something I'm on the Ohio Housing Council's lobbying efforts to change that. It was terrible legislation, incredibly short-sighted. It crippled 9 projects that we're working on. The inability to twine state historic tax credits and low-income housing tax credits at a time when the federal government has reduced housing trust fund dollars to each state by 46% makes these projects more and more difficult to do. Construction costs have not come down really. Materials costs have stabilized, but labor costs continue to rise. There's still a lack of skilled labor, so that anytime one of our financing tools is disabled, it makes affordable housing more and more difficult to achieve. Cleveland has a shortage of 55,000 affordable housing units. That's the city of Cleveland. That's not even greater Cleveland. And then if you look at other cities in Ohio, Dayton, Columbus, Toledo, Youngstown, Cincinnati, major metropolitan areas, that number hovers between 40 and 60,000 for each one of those cities. So to further cripple and disable the ability to convert historic structures like Longfellow just slows down the process. Now, I have confidence in the creativity of the industry partners, so I think that ultimately we'll find other ways to build the mousetrap, but it has had devastating impact. It literally affected 9 Maroos projects that we're doing around the state of Ohio, 3 in Columbus, 4 in Cleveland, and 2 in Dayton.
Wow. Okay, reminder, type your questions in the chat if you have them. I'll continue to ask my questions if no one will have any others. Brant, I know that your project isn't quite complete. I think you gave us estimated timeline, and now I've forgotten what you said in the fall, but can you tell me what's left to do, what your timeline is? And I'm also curious if you consulted with Playhouse Square at all, knowing the dramatic renovations that they've done there.
Yes. So go in reverse order. Yeah, Playhouse Square is one of our favorite clients. So we took the Sandusky Theater through Playhouse Square during this process. They've been very involved with Playhouse Square, even in shared programming that they'll have interest with. But we went through many of Playhouse Square's theaters. We looked at work we've done there, sat in all the seats, and actually having that as a resource here has been really helpful in kind of getting the client on board. As far as timeline, fall of this year is what's expected for us to finish. And what's left in the historic renovation is it's really the chairs and the carpeting within the theater itself. And right now for the new addition, there's starting foundations. They should be putting up steel today. And that's really just kicking off. So I think it'll be an aggressive finish to get the new part up.
Yeah, sounds like you still have substantial work, but I'm sure you'll get it done in time.
Yep.
Great. Okay, Divya asks, could CARE be used for baseline of embodied carbon of existing building? And then on the flip side, anyone here begun to use material passports for major rehabs and new construction, so it allows for better monitoring of buildings for future renovations and adaptive reuse and even urban mining. So we'll turn the care portion question over to Lori. I know she's signed off, but we'll get that to you, Divya. Anybody want to take the rest of that? Begun to use material passports for major rehabs.
We have not yet, so I have to defer to Lori.
Okay. Well, Divya, we'll get Lori to answer that for you and get back to you. We have just a couple more minutes, so I'll just ask a really broad question for the speakers. You know, were there any surprises that came up in your projects? Maybe something that you didn't include in your presentation that was of interest that you might want to share with us? Any crazy things that happened that you had to overcome?
I don't know. I mean, historic renovation, there's always crazy things you have to overcome. I mean, I guess ours was keeping the hotel operating while we were doing this. We had to take, obviously, floor by floor. We started at the top, taking floors offline while trying to keep guests happy is a huge challenge. And you know, the hotel was great. The owner's been great to work with, and you need a good ownership partner to do that. But trying to work in any building that you know the public is in is no matter how many times you do it, it's always difficult and challenging. Adds a little bit extra dynamic.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I don't have a better answer for our project. Other than working in a historic building is always a surprise, and when you open up a wall, you don't know what you're going to find. At Sandusky, one thing that might have been unique to its location close to the lake was how close the bedrock was and how fast that went from almost directly kind of under a foot underground to 10 feet underground. So that created a lot of challenges in excavating that you don't normally have.
I would imagine.
My answer is a little different. You know, Jared and I worked together, but at Longfellow, I was surprised. I'm going to talk about the soft side. I was surprised at how much resistance we got initially from CMSD to want to participate in a process that saved a school building. I can tell you that they ended up being a great partner, CMSD did, but we came to a precipice conversation where I basically said, there's going to be one of two stories told. It's going to be what a terrible, on the front page of the Plain Dealer, and I'm going to make sure it happens. And I literally said, the story is either going to be that CMSD is the worst steward of historic buildings in the state of Ohio, and that they needlessly demolish schools and tear apart neighborhoods. Or the narrative's going to be that CMSD participated in a process and have found and developed a roadmap to save beautiful, iconic Cleveland historic structures that put us on the map nationally. And I gave them the option, and I had a former student of mine at Cleveland State who at the time was the chief real estate reporter for the Cleveland Plain Dealer on speed dial, and I dialed her number in the meeting and held it up so they could see I wasn't kidding. And so they said, no. And then we literally, that was the turning point in the negotiation. Up until then, they were going to tear that school down. We asked for a 6-month stay, and they got another 6 months, and they became wonderful partners and continue to be.
Yeah, you said you've got 12 more coming up, so clearly that I think that's what resonated with me and your story, Arn, was that what you did was replicable, right? You've sort of created that blueprint for 12 more.
Yeah, and I think that's in historic rehab. Um, because of how expensive the construction is, there has to be a bigger story. There has to be a bigger narrative that's more than just one building. The Hotel Cleveland, thank you, the Hotel Cleveland narrative is more than just about doing, $80 million worth of historic renovation work to a hotel. It is about preserving a piece that is absolutely integral and a keystone of the history of downtown Cleveland. And absent Skyline and their brave, resolute willingness to participate in this process through a pandemic that saw nobody staying in their hotel, they were willing to tough it out and participate in a process and deal with SHPO and a lot of lender concerns and demands, and work with us on a design build basis, and put confidence in us, that together we could create a different kind of blueprint. This is a blueprint that cities can follow because the city of Cleveland provided certain financing and certain incentives into this project as well, that go beyond historic tax credits, which this project needed. And the city and the county and the state all stepped up. And again, you want to create a duplicatable blueprint that other cities, other communities can follow and can point to.
Yeah, and you did a fabulous job of that.
The standard building was another example, by the way, we didn't have time to talk about that, but that was another example of an office building that was 4% occupied, that was repurposed. And now you see many office buildings in urban centers being converted to residential or other purposes. And it can be done, but you need to figure out how to get stakeholder engagement and then figure out how to do it over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question here that popped up, affordable housing. Has there been some work on integrating IRA's electrical retrofits to LIHTC credits to make the capital stack any lighter?
Well, yes, I mean, that's a great question. Yes, there's efforts because to use as many devices as possible. Reducing the electrical energy load of a building is really important. Monetizing that savings is even more important to help the projects work.
The question is, what is IRA? That's the Inflation Reduction Act that the federal government has enacted to offer funding for energy efficiency projects and so on and so forth. Maybe can any of you speak to, did any of you use any IRA funding?
We did not, because that funding is very hard to get to so far. It's just now being rolled out. One of the problems with this administration is they made excellent strides at creating programs, but it's like the ARPA funds. It took several years for the ARPA funds to actually get to cities, to get to those organizations that could implement and utilize those funds. It took several years. So the energy savings from the IRA have been very slow to roll out, very, very slow.
Yeah, and we've had people asking a lot of questions. It seems a little confusing as well, between grant funding and tax credits, of course.
Yeah, Hotel Cleveland did get some energy tax credits from the state, but it didn't have anything to do with IRA.
Understood. Yeah, and Megan, thank you. She posted the link for information on the Inflation Reduction Act. Any other questions? We're coming up on time. And so if there are no other questions in the chat, I hope I didn't miss any. We will close this session out, and I will thank our speakers, Lori, Arn, Brandt, and Jared, You all did a great job, and congratulations on your projects. They're all just stellar projects, and I was just so happy that you were all able to present today to tell our group about them. So thanks very much. I will post the recording to our website along with the slide presentations. Give me a day or two. Don't forget to fill out your continuing education credit sign-in sheet by the close of business today. And please do our very short survey. We want your ideas for other sessions, and we need your feedback so that we can continue to bring sessions that are of interest to you. Presenters, thanks again. Thanks everyone who participated today, and we'll see you at the next event. Thanks.
Thanks, Cindy. Appreciate everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.